What's going on YouTube? Cloverbuzz here, back with another Scarlet Violet video, and today we're going to be talking about the final day of the World Championships, which featured a very good final between two very good players, one being Shohei Kimura, which of course is in fact your new world champion, and then on the flip side you had the finalist, the runner-up, Michael Kelsch, with the Dragapult team, and we're going to be covering both of these teams in a second. But just overall, if you wanted to also take a look at just the top cut results overall, we'll do that as well here, but the graphic is from Victory Road, so if you're interested in some of the teams that were being used, feel free to check them out on the Victory Road website, right? But moving back into the finals, so basically Shohei Kimura was using this 5-man core, which again I like to say is the best 5-man core in Regulation D. We talked about this in the previous video and some of our other videos, but it's basically, Landorus, Amoongus with this Flutter Mane combination, right? And then you round it out with Iron Hands, Urshifu, and then Chien-Pao is often the flexible slot. I've seen some other Pokemon being used in this slot over here, but like us, we were using Moltres, right, back in July, which was also used in the Day 2 World Championships. Video on that later. But Shohei's been a good player for a while now, for the last few years or so. So he's been at this. This is nothing new. And then Michael, from what I understand, is a new VGC player that jumped on the scene. He was previously like a very strong singles player, so it's nice to see the transition over onto this side. But it's basically this Dragapult Chien-Pao combination with Farigiraf, along with the Fire Water Grass core with Urshifu, Heatran, and Rillaboom, right? And if you know Michael, and if you've been keeping tabs on the limitless tours, he is playing a whole bunch of limitless tours all the time, right? And he got a lot of practice leading into the World Championships, right? And usually, a lot of these top players, you don't see them playing too many limitless tours. They prefer to, test within their friend groups, their team building groups. So this way they don't give out information, to the public so easily. But Michael says, no, I need to practice. I don't care if my team, is scouted in terms of like, open team sheet stuff, because the play is what matters at the end of the day, right? And he was able to reach the finals on the biggest stage of them all. So congratulations to Michael. Again, he put up a great show for us. And then at the same time, Shohei was really just using this strong combination of like Chien-Pao plus either something like Urshifu or Flutter Mane. But really the MVP was, of course, the Amoongus, which I wanted to spotlight here. And basically Amoongus is now a 3-time world champion, right? And for good reason, right? This mushroom is just too good, right? Because when Michael needed big damage from some of his mons, like the Dragapult, for example, went for like Terra Ghost, Terra Blast, it just could not KO the Amoongus. And because of that, Amoongus clicks the one move that scares everyone, and that is Spore, right? And that is just pretty much just guaranteed sleep. And the first turn, then you have like subsequent turns of sleep from there. And what it really does, again, the Spore is nothing new. It just neutralizes your slots, right? And it basically reduces the amount of things you can do and reduces the amount of damage that you're able to take, because one of your slots is asleep, right? And then you have to make a decision. Do I just stay in and take the risk to try and wake up while taking free damage, or do I try and make a switch knowing that maybe I might get punished for it, but at the same time I have to try and be a little bit more proactive because I have no damage coming out from my board on the field, right? And then of course you have the Rage Powder, which is able to keep Pokemon like Flutter Mane relatively safe, right? Because Flutter Mane, at the hands of something like Urshifu or even like Chien-Pao, for example, it could suffer, right? But when you have Amoongus just being able to click redirection moves like Rage Powder, especially this Tera Water concept, then all of a sudden the ice damage from the Chien-Pao is just neutralized for that sense, right? And then of course you have Pollen Puff for chipping things down, and then just healing back over time, right? And that's the whole benefit of having Amoongus on your team. And at the same time, it also just gives you something to play within the Trick Room matchup, right? And that was the case sometimes, because Michael, he couldn't really click Trick Room, right, with his Farigiraf, because then that just means the Amoongus gets to spore everything, right? And it just got a little bit tricky for Michael to keep up with the Amoongus. It just couldn't be able to KO it. And then even when you do manage to chip it down, to a low amount of health, you just switch it out with Regenerator, and then it comes back in with additional health, and then it's back to doing what it does best, and that's just redirecting and clicking Spore. And then from there, your sweeper options like Flutter Mane and your Urshifus are just able to come in and just deal like Surging Strike damage. And then even like the Chien-Pao is able to just do big damage altogether, right? And then at the same time, Shohei with the Icicle Crash on the Chien-Pao. Again, the Icicle Crash is just something that has risen as of late, from Chien-Paos within the meta, and for good reason, right? Because you don't get to take Rocky Helmet chip damage, by using Icicle Crash. At the same time, you also get the flinch chance, which was a very pivotal thing that happened within their match, right? Getting that important flinch on the Rillaboom from Michael's side was huge, because then that just meant no damage that turn from the Rillaboom, and it just got chipped so much that it didn't really get a second turn to try and do something again, right? So you have that, and it's stronger than Ice Spinner, right? Because now with Ice Spinner, with Icicle Crash, you get a little bit more damage, and you get to blow up terrain, something like against the Rillaboom. So, without that, grassy terrain recovery, you're just able to deny your opponent from, getting any kind of health back over time. Now, of course, the main thing is the chance to miss, right? And that's the drawback with it, right? You get more power, you don't get Rocky Helmet chipped, and you get to blow up terrain, or you don't get to blow up your terrain, I should say. So I may have misspoke. I think I said that over the Ice Spinner. But then at the same time, the risk is the accuracy, right? So that is something that players were willing to take the risk on, coming into Worlds, because they felt that the Rocky Helmet, was just too much. And the extra damage, especially when you go Adamant Nature, as opposed to Jolly, is just too good to not try and use, right? So it makes a lot of sense. And then the Iron Hands, of course, you just get Fake Out Pressure altogether, and then just good solid moves in terms of like Fake Out, Wild Charge, Drain Punch, and then something like Heavy Slam just to snipe Flutter Manes, right? And then of course your last slot, your flex slot, we had the Moltres, but of course Landorus just makes a lot of sense on teams like this. You're able to give the team Intimidate support, and now stuff like Flutter Mane and Chien-Pao can all of a sudden take physical hits a little bit better, because you have the Landorus on the field. And then at the same time, you have pivot potential here with something like U-Turn, especially if it's Scarf, you're able to outspeed opposing Flutter Manes and just deal a whole bunch of damage altogether, right? So Landorus, really, really good. Once again, wasn't really brought in the finals. It was left home, because, it's just matchup dependent. But, just overall, a really, really good Pokemon to have on these kinds of teams, right? But again, so congratulations to Shohei. And then again, Michael's side, he did what he could. He had a very, very good squad. Of course, again, this Fire, Water, Grass core of Urshifu, Heatran, and Rillaboom. The Rillaboom was actually interesting, right? The Rillaboom had a Citrus Berry, and it was Tera Poison, right? So if you just look at that for a second, right, in terms of what he was trying to do. Tera Poison is interesting, right? Because it basically just kind of removes all your weaknesses, right, altogether. And with Tera Poison, you're just able to better take the Flutter Mane damage a little bit better, especially if they're clicking something like Moonblast, because now without the Assault Vest, right? By the way, he was running, like I said, he was running Citrus Ray, so there's no AV on this Rillaboom. Your special defense isn't all that great, so you're suffering at the hands of like Moonblast from Flutter Mane, for example, right? But then if you just click Tera Poison, you're able to take that much better and then get off the key Wood Hammer and just pretty much just KO it, which is what he did, right? I believe in the first game. And then, Citrus Berry with this passive recovery, that just adds on to, the grassy terrain stuff. So that was also really, really cool to see. But again, this is another one of those adaptations that you're going to find on what is otherwise a relatively common Pokemon within the meta. But then just small, minor intricacies like, different Terra, different item, maybe one tech move, really just makes a difference in how the team can have certain outs and certain ways of playing, against certain different matchups, right? So that was pretty cool. And of course, Michael's Farigiraf, which was really good in terms of like taking damage. The Rocky Helmet on the Farigiraf was also really good. It did quite a number on something like an Urshifu, which is the whole point of the Rocky Helmet, right? So you can get to punish that Pokemon, for going for Surging Strikes there. And then overall Dragon Darts, Dragon Darts, Terra Blast, Terra Ghost, we know what that could do, right? And then Heatran was relatively standard. So, very solid all around. But once again, the whole story was the Amoongus, and Amoongus is the world champion, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the other results that we saw and just some other trends and developments that we saw, and just anything that we can pinpoint, and in terms of like summarizing the top cut as a whole. All right, let's take a look. Okay, let's just look at some like overall statistics here. So basically, like Cresselia, Ursaluna, right? Before we even like look at some of them, just in terms of in general of the archetype, how many do we see? 1, 2, 3, And is there another one on the side? So 3 Cresselia Ursaluna teams were in the top cut. So that's also pretty good. You know, it just shows you that it's a very, very strong archetype. There's 2 rain teams as well. So that's really cool. No Basque Legion, by the way, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then over here, the Baxcalibur Zapdos combination, which I like a lot. You know, we had a rental on that, you know, for the month of August. This obviously is a little bit different, but again, you still have Heatran Urshifu, which is also what we had. We had the Rillaboom instead of the Amoongus. And then they decided to go with a Goldango here for, like, you know, double steal with Goldango and Heatran over here, which makes a lot of sense. So this is also pretty cool to see. Again, another one of those outlier teams. But I like Baxcalibur Zapdos overall. You know, that's kind of why I built a rental around it back in August, and it's cool to see it do well overall in the World Championships, right? Michael's team, which is again a team that we also spotlighted as one of the top 10 best teams heading into the World Championships. So here we go, we got to see it in the finals. So that was a good call by us on the channel there. Here's another one, right, that we also called it at number 10 in our list. This team that Marco is using, I believe Neil made this, you know, about maybe a month ago. So I guess he stuck with it because he liked it a lot. And again, it's like a Regulation C team, but you know, just the way it functions and the way it's being used, it just has like pretty much straightforward, super strong meta Pokemon that, you know, have really good stats. Gyarados, Amoongus, and Chiyu is a very, very good Fire, Water, Grass core, and Marco was able to take it very, very far within the top 4, so that's also really nice to see. And then again, like we said previously, with this 5-man core that some of these players are using with the Landorus, Amoongus, Iron Hands, you know, Flutter Mane and Urshifu, just add a +1, Shohei, Kaito, Mao, right, and Taro, Okada. These are all like 4 players that were just pretty much using the same idea. You know, now you just slap on Chien-Pao, and now your Urshifu and your Landorus are just doing more damage, as well as yourself and your Iron Hands, right? So that's another cool thing to see. And they built together. I'm sure, right? Because you know, fellow countrymen. And then from here, you know, a couple of interesting tech Pokemon over here. Amelia Forbes again with the Bramblegast, which is something that, you know, if it's one of those niche Pokemon that if you explore enough, it can actually do relatively well against the meta. So it's really, really cool to see that it got this far within the top 16 on this stage, and probably would have gone further, right, if it weren't for a little bit of controversy. But you know, we won't discuss that here. But then moving forward, another cool I think I saw it over here. Well, the Hisuian Arcanine made an appearance, right, within the top 16. So this is almost the identical idea with Utah, and then was it Maddie? No, it was somewhere else over here that I can't find over here. Oh yeah, it was right here. So instead of, like, if you look at Victor's team over here, he has the Heatran, but with Utah, he's going with the Hisuian Arcanine for their fire type choices, and it just makes a lot of sense. You know, a little bit of difference in both of them. I don't know exactly the complete moveset, but you know, you get Intimidate on this team with a really strong physical attacker, whereas on this side you get a strong special attacker without the Intimidate. But of course, a little bit of variance there into 2 Pokemon as a whole, right? Dragonite, how many teams? Well, you had some with the, again, on the Ursaluna teams, 1, 2. So Dragonite did have an impact here. Not as much as one would think, like in the beginning of the format, right? You know, where Dragonite just kind of kept dropping in usage just overall, you know, from the start up until now. It lost its spot within the top 10. Landorus took that spot altogether, so that might merit, you know, maybe like a different video topic for, you know, within the coming weeks, like why, you know, Landorus rose whereas Dragonite dropped. But here we got to see it on the biggest stage here, but still, it's still very, very good. And it's interesting to note that these Dragonite teams do not have the Chien-Pao, right? I guess that's pretty much like almost like a meta call, like, okay, we can run Farigiraf here, which we did see one, right? So Farigiraf did make a splash, you know, within the top 16, but maybe not as big of a splash as one might think, right? So in that sense, yeah. Okay, what I also wanted to also just take a look at is that Rain archetype overall, because, you know, the evolution of the Rain team from what we thought would be like the strongest ideal option has changed over time, you know, to what we saw now within the top 16, right? So previously it was something like this. You had Pelipper and Basque Legion as your core, right? And then from there you had something like an Amoongus, and then you had the Thundurus here, the Thunderstarian, okay, able to support this core, you know, because of Volt Absorb, you know, both very weak to electric type attacks. And then from there, it was the Hisuian Gudra, right? And then slapping on in the last slot here was the Flutter Mane, right? For a Dragon Fairy Steel Core in this sense, right? So this was the premier Rain team leading into the World Championships, and it's still relatively strong overall, right? This is Devin's team, Team Spirit, that has been used quite a lot in some of these limitless tours. But then we fast forward into the World Championships, and in fact, there was no Hisuian Gudra and there was no Basque Legion. Instead, our Rain Sweeper was pretty much the Urshifu Rapid Strike over here, right? So you might as well just put this next to the Pelipper over here. And then just to make this do more damage, now we just slap on a Chien-Pao over here. So we have that. And then we still have the Amoongus for, you know, playing against certain Trick Room matchups and then just protecting our Pokemon overall. But we don't have the Thundurus anymore. And the Flutter Mane, you can pretty much just say goodbye. So instead of the Hisuian Gudra for our Steel type, we're going to add the Goldango now, which does relatively well in Rain altogether. And is a good pairing with Pelipper. It gives you a Flying type pivot, you know, coming in from a Ground type perspective. And then at the same time, you know, a Spore from Amoongus just doesn't work on Goldango. And then Goldango appreciates the Rain because it'll reduce fire damage altogether against it because, you know, you are a Steel type, you don't like fire type damage. And then I always felt this was the case in any kind of Rain team. You always wanted the Iron Hands on teams like this, just because the Iron Hands just gives you something, at least against the Iron Bundle for that matter, because Iron Bundle just does so well against a lot of these teams, right? Pelipper, Urshifu, and Amoongus, they both suffer, you know, at the hands of Freeze Dry. But, you know, there was no Iron Bundle, or not a lot of it, at least nothing in the top 16. But altogether, it's just a great Pokemon overall. And then like Amoongus and Iron Hands, they also can function within that Trick Room archetype as well. And then now you have a little bit more insurance in trying to set up your Tailwind, you know, because now you have Fake Out pressure on your team. And then at the same time, you know, I don't know if this Goldango was like Specs or, you know, Choice Scarf, but if it was Nasty Plot, you know, which I would imagine with Amoongus here, now you can also potentially set that up as well. So like this is a pretty good idea in terms of like trying to use Rain. You know, just make Urshifu do a bunch of damage, you know, thanks to Pelipper. Tailwind support for speed control. You have priority, you know, with the Chien-Pao, you have Fake Out here, you have redirection support, and then you have some special attack damage in addition to the Pelipper coming out from the Goldango, right? Whether it's Specs or, you know, Scarf or Leftovers Nasty Plot, either way, Goldango can use any of those sets relatively well on a team like this. So this is a pretty cool idea and a pretty cool way to run Rain. And it was used by 2 players. So again, notably Abdullah, you know, within the top 8, and then Luca also reaching very far with it as well, you know, coming close, you know, with the top 4 placement. So yeah, let me know what you think of this Rain idea as opposed to the Basque Legion team, but we're going to move forward as far as like a little bit more coverage on some of the World Championship themes. All right, so next up, no Dondozo within the top 16, right? So, you know, this is also very interesting, right? Coming into the World Championships, right? Dondozo was slowly coming back, you know, within the meta, and it was making a bit of a splash, you know, with these Tornadus teams that were slapped on with like Glamora, and then the last 2 ended up being something like Flutter Mane and then a Chiyu, right? This was like the premier Dondozo team, you know, leading into the World Championships, right? And we did see it, you know, I believe we did see it on stream a couple of times, you know, whether it was like day 1 or day 2, I don't remember off the top of my head, but as far as like cracking the final top 16, there was not a single one in sight. We did get to see like, I know even a solo Dondozo, but I guess the power creep finally caught up to it a little bit, you know, whereas, you know, just having one option against 2 options on their side, it just kind of falls off a little bit. But overall, I still think it's a pretty strong archetype. It just all depends on like matchup and play. But, you know, as far as like placement within the top cut in the World Championships, we just did not see it. There were more other stronger teams and stronger themes overall that were just able to basically push Dondozo to the side for a bit. And I guess for some people that might be some good news, right? You know, depending on if you're a Dondozo supporter or hater or not. But at least, you know, for this particular Worlds, it did not come close to getting that big achievement. All right, how about Tailwind? How did the Tornadus teams fare? So, you know, in terms of like starting off some of these hyper aggressive Tailwind teams, I feel like you always just slap on Flutter Mane and Urshifu first, right? And then this is the core that you build around, right? Because now with Tailwind on this team, along with Rain Dance support, if they did have it, now you're just doing so much damage with your Urshifu, right? And then at the same time, the Tailwind just has you as the Flutter Mane able to win potential mirrors, right? Because, you know, Flutter Manes are everywhere, and it all depends on like what's your speed tier. Are you fast, or are you the modest special attack variant if you're running booster energy? And if so, like what kind of speed tier did you go for, right? So then from there, it just really depends on how you wanted to play the matchup. You could just simply slap on Rillaboom and Heatran here, right? And then this would give you that Fire, Water, Grass core, and then over here, some physical option here. And in this case, it was ideally the Chien-Pao, where you're just having your Rillaboom and your Urshifu just do a bunch of damage, and then at the same time, you get Fake Out Surging Strikes pressure. And then Tornadus, of course, is also just able to help you reduce a little bit of fire damage overall, you know, with Rain Dance, you know, just special thanks to that. And then Rillaboom and Chien-Pao, they definitely enjoyed that more or less. And then probably the Heatran is something like substitute on these teams. But, you know, something like this is just another standard way of trying to build hyper offense. And it was the theme, you know, throughout Worlds. Like, what are these Tornadus teams going to be using to, you know, couple their damage partners with, right? And this is a very standard squad that you might see. So interesting to see, but you know, in terms of like Dragonite, something that was a staple on these teams was left off here, right? And you know, sometimes you know, leading up to this, the Tornadus wasn't even on here, but instead it was actually just the Dragonite. So it was just Dragonite Chien-Pao with the Fire, Water, Grass core, and then a Flutter Mane, right? And you know, this was basically our rental, right, for July. But in the Worlds, it was pretty much just said, okay, you know what? Maybe we don't need Dragonite here. We don't need that Dragonite Chien-Pao combination, and maybe just the overall speed control by slapping on the Tornadus with this 5 is the way to go about it, right? I feel like both work, and really just depends on the player. But as far as like the world stage, it was the Tornadus as opposed to the Dragonite slot. Next up, on the flip side, the Trick Room cores. So I feel like you always revolve around these three: Cresselia, Ursaluna, and Iron Hands. You know, with the Iron Hands just doing so well. With the Cresselia, able to set up, you know, the Trick Room safely a little bit better, you know, because you have Fake Out pressure here, and then at the same time you have another physical sweeper in the Trick Room that the Cresselia can help support at the same time, because again, you know, with Iron Hands just going for something like Wild Charge, you know, you're dealing chip damage to yourself, and then if you wanted to recover it, you would have to go for your Drain Punch. But now, not necessarily, because now you can just simply rely on the Lunar Blessing from the Cresselia to be able to heal up your damage that you would deal with your own Wild Charge. And then the Ursaluna, again, it was either coming down to something like Facade Spam or something like Headlong Rush or Earthquake. It just really depended on how you wanted to play the Ursaluna in that sense. But you always started here, and then this is where the variance starts to happen, right? But either way, I still think Flutter Mane always comes on teams like this, just to give you like another fast mode to the team. And then, you know, depending on whether you wanted the Sun variant, where like you have Trick Room Sun team, you know, in this sense, or you just had like a standard Cresselia Ursaluna team, you could just simply also just slap on Urshifu over here, like, which is what some of these other players did, and then just slap on the Dragonite here. So now you have this as like your quote-unquote fast mode, or you can just go a little bit more of the slower route, remove these two, and then instead go with something like this. You have a Torkoal here, right, which can also click Eruption, you know, within Trick Room. You know, this becomes your special sweeper, and then you just add Amoongus for a little bit more security, right? And we did something like this. We actually built 1, 2, 3 with this 5. I actually built this for a viewer for also the month of August, but instead of the Amoongus here, we had something else in this slot, which I won't reveal just yet. We'll probably do a team building video, but something else in that sense. But again, this 5, as far as like Trick Room Sun, this is also pretty good. And it really just depended on how you wanted to run it. Sometimes you would see like Landorus on these teams, right? Double ground ideas, you know, with Landorus, Ursaluna. That was also a thing to watch out for leading into the World Championships. Or in our case, we also did Gyarados, and that was one of our rentals as well. But again, this whole idea of like, you know, having these 4 and then your last 2 are your flex slots, that would be the way to go. And we saw that, you know, within the top 16, right? We had 3 teams of Cresselia, Ursaluna, you know, revolving around this idea. And, you know, and just some other like closing ideas, like moving forward, you know, from here into the last month of Regulation C. This idea of, again, like we mentioned in the previous video, Terra Grass, Flutter Mane with Rocky Helmet, not only allows you to resist against an opposing Urshifu, but it allows you to get around Amoongus, right? So that's something that you might see moving forward. But again, without the booster energy, that might be a little bit tricky. You're giving up a little bit more damage, but at least you gain some survivability, right? So it's like a trade-off in that sense. So you might see this a little bit more. And then this new set of the Urshifu, you know, that has been born is this safety goggles set with giving up the close combat and instead going with Swords Dance instead. So now you have super hard-hitting Aqua Jets that can just bypass Protect, and then Surging Strikes, again, just doing so much more damage. And now what you're able to do is, instead of going Adamant 156, which is normally what you would do with like Mystic Water sets, now you can drop this to Adamant 76, right? A little bit less, but because you're going for Swords Dance, you don't really care that you're dropping your attack, you know, this much, because now what allows you to do is just invest more into your bulk stats. So you might see like something like this, right? And then just have a little bit more, you know, some speed, but not like a whole lot of speed, you know, and then from there you just invest in your defense and special defenses, and then you're just like super hard hitting from here, right? And that was the theme, you know, throughout Worlds, like, you know, this safety goggles, being able to get around Amoongus. You don't need Tera Grass anymore, right? You can still stay, you know, Tera Water, or in some cases like even Tera Poison, which will resist the Flutter Mane matchup, you know, with the Moonblast spam. So that was a theme that we saw, you know, in Worlds. And then also like Gastrodon here, there wasn't really a whole lot of it. Like in top 16, we didn't really see it, but it was used in the tour, of course, as a way of deterring the Urshifu. Like this is still like a hard wall against this kind of sets, because you can't really like bypass it. So I was, you know, very surprised not to see the Gastrodon within the top 16, but also not surprised, right? Because it just doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. It just kind of sits there, clicks Yawn, which is of course relatively annoying, but it's very like only matchup specific against the Urshifu, because other than that, there's still Rillaboom running around, and you know, at that point, the Rillaboom is just putting so much pressure on the Gastrodon. It's almost like a pin. So, you know, in that sense, maybe it just wasn't really the best option to play within the top cut in the World Championship. So you didn't really see it, but it was used. But, you know, moving forward, maybe you might see a little bit more now that the Urshifus are forgoing the fighting move, because now they have nothing to click against this Gastrodon. But Rillaboom is rising. You know, we saw the graphics from day 1 to day 2, and now even now, you know, in the top, the Rillabooms are pretty much going to crack the top 5 soon. So, you know, we'll see what Gastrodon can truly do within the rest of the format, right? So, other than that, I think we pretty much covered everything. So yeah, let me know what you think of the World Championships as a whole, from this top 16, and then from the previous 2 days. Again, what your thoughts and comments on how the tournament played out. You know, all things aside, because of the bannings and whatnot. You know, that's a separate discussion for another day. But yeah, in terms of like what we did see from the teams, and just overall, you know, of course, Flutter Mane is now a world champion. So is Iron Hands. You know, no surprises there. Amoongus, 3-time world champion. You know, I feel like it's got many more to come, because it's just so good. And until we get a better, you know, mushroom, I would say, Amoongus is here to stay for many more years to come. So yeah, we'll be back with another video in the next one, guys. Peace out and have a good one.